something to say? Be part of Saskatchewan's biggest conversation. This is Gormley on 650 CKOM.
I'm John Gormley. Good to have you here. Thanks for checking in. We're going to go a little further and deeper. I just was alluding to it before the top of the hour on the wearing of masks. Costco for some time now has had a mask policy. When you go to a Costco, hands are sanitized, you are offered a mask or you pull out your own, you go in. Well, Walmart soon to be doing that. In fact, in many places today. But as part of the back to school program that'll happen September the 1st, been a lot of debate, and I was mentioning this idea, and you've got a lot of debates. You've got parents who are very concerned, and so they should be. You've got some teachers concerned. You've also got a very politicized debate where every single New Democrat, big QP union, SEIU, just weeks away from a provincial election, are dubbing this the worst back-to-school program anywhere in Canada. So if you parse away the politics, I mean, that's going to accompany anything that goes on in the world of government just weeks before an election. So what is this going to look like? Now, we know from yesterday's details on the level 2, and there are 4 levels of safety associated with the back-to-school plan. Level 1 being keep things as much as normal. Level 2 being masks. Level 3 being some integration, stronger cohorts of students, plus integration between being in the classroom and out of the classroom, perhaps at home or somewhere. Level 4, of course, is exactly what we had from March on. Kids will be at home doing distance learning. So those 4 levels will be determined by each of the 27 different school boards. So we'll go a little further on what the masking is going to look like. But one person who's been speaking out on what he would like to see in classrooms is a prof at the University of Saskatchewan, biochemistry professor from the U of S, Kyle Anderson, who also studies microbiology, immunology, asks that we examine a system, and this has been done in some of the European countries, of so-called pool testing. So kids are in school, and we do a randomized type of testing on different cohorts of the kids. I don't fully understand how this works, although we've all become much better on what nucleic acid-based or PCR testing is. We know the throat swabs or the nasopharyngeal swabs. I mean, we've all done a lot of reading on those things, but I'm fascinated to know how a program like this would work if the government moved that way. We find Dr. Anderson in Saskatoon today. Kyle, thanks so much for taking our call.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, walk me through. You've got 5 kids in a rural school division, so obviously as a dad you've got a stake in this. What does the testing protocol look like that you'd like to see?
So this wouldn't be sort of individual testing to see if one student is COVID positive or if they're COVID negative. This would really be sort of surveillance, where we want to see if there is one student in the school and try and do that with as few tests as possible. And what we can do is, we all know about the nasal swabs. Those don't need to be tested 10 swabs to 10 tests. They can be done 10 swabs, get washed into the same solution to make a single test. And that can optimize our sort of throughput, just allowing us to do 100 tests that covers 10,000 students, or maybe not quite that many, maybe 5,000 students. 50 students in a test would be doable. And that way we can test more often, we can test more students, and like having smoke detectors in houses, it gives us that early warning before the fire happens, right, when it's first just smoke.
So, okay, I need your help on this, and you're the microbiologist. I'm not. So the lab scenario, you take, on the nucleic acid, the PCR, you can either do a throat swab or nasopharyngeal, or is there one that's better than the other?
I think what we originally found was that the back of the nose, the nasopharyngeal, was the best test, but there have been papers published, there have been tests done saying that the front nasal swab or the throat swab, virus still gets shed into those airways, and you're still going to be able to detect it. Maybe not quite as well, but we're not looking at a perfect test. We're looking to get as many tests done as possible.
Let's take, for example, you talk about surveillance. So we do a randomized test, and when you talk about washing them together, so you test a group of the swabs together. If the virus is shown to be present, then you go back from there and try and determine who had the virus?
Yeah, so you could imagine a cohort of students. So my son's grade 6 class coming up here, and say each kid Monday morning sticks a Q-tip up the front of their nose. It doesn't need to be one of those long swabs. And we say, if one kid doesn't do it perfectly, that's fine. That test might not be valid for that one student, but the rest of them are all contributing potentially virus-containing swabs into a single bag. And then all of those would get sort of put into one solution. So whether one student had a virus or 2 or 0, it's all the same sort of mix at that point. If that came back positive, absolutely you need to test each student in that class again individually and make sure you do it, proper back-of-the-nose swabs.
Now, we do know, and I think you agree as a scientist, that the nature of the PCR testing, it's the virus today, right? It's not what happened yesterday or what will happen tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a point-in-time test. It's not going to be necessarily predictive of what's happening next week. And, really, if we do test more often, we'll catch those cases earlier before they have a chance to spread.
In the situation of this kind of test, is there an argument that there are limited resources in that the provincial lab is doing, up to nearly 2,000 tests a day when they can, that even pooling this, you've got X number of thousand kids in so many hundreds of schools, would this be something that would just be an obstacle to getting other testing done?
Yeah, so I think what we need to sort of imagine is that if we don't use the reserve of tests that we have, so I think Dr. Shahab yesterday in the live stream said that they're looking to get, by the start of the school year, 4,000 tests a day. So if we were using just 10% of that and sort of saying that 10% of our daily tests are going to be done as surveillance tests, and then the other 90% will be done as individualized testing, that's just sort of being able to get that early warning system. And we don't
Help me out on the shedding. Yeah, good point. Help me out on the shedding. Mm-hmm. When we begin to shed this virus, even if we're going to become symptomatic, the shedding appears before we get the symptoms?
Yes. So there are some children or even adults who are completely asymptomatic. The way that their immune system reacts to the virus does not give them sick symptoms. It doesn't make them have coughing. It doesn't make them have a runny nose, but they're still producing virus and they're still exhaling virus. They're still, if they are singing or if they're yelling, those larger droplets are getting propelled further distances, but they don't know that they're sick. And I mean, there were cases 200 years ago of people with salmonella who worked in kitchens and were getting people sick, and they were these sort of silent spreaders where they were not having any symptoms, but they were a source of virus or a source of bacteria, and that's just part of one of the oddities of human biology is that not everyone always gets symptoms, even if they are a sort of vector of disease.
So yes, great explanation, asymptomatic, but if somebody's going to develop symptoms, are they still shedding prior to the symptom manifestation?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so this would be a way of catching people in either event then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you are pre-symptomatic, you just haven't developed symptoms yet, or if you're going to be completely asymptomatic, where you never get symptoms, you would still be able to get a positive result using the PCR test.
Dr. Kyle Anderson with us, Assistant Professor of Biochemistry, Microbiology, Immunology at the U of S. So what's been the response to this call for, as you refer to it, pooled surveillance testing?
The response has really been people just sort of saying, I didn't know that this was possible. And just sort of, I think that parents are really anxious right now in that we all want to send our kids to school. We want to get the economy going. We want to be able to get our kids socializing. We want them to not be another year behind school. So everybody has the same common goal, but parents want to do this safely. And being able to have something where we're saying we are going to be monitoring not just for symptoms. We're not just going to be monitoring for temperature, because we know that students are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. So saying that we're going to be doing the test that matters, the virus test. And, I think right now there's about 700 people who've sort of shared my initial video saying, I didn't even know this was possible. And the whole reason I made the video was just to try and get more awareness out there, because if more people are asking the provincial government to say, we would like some of our tests to be doing the surveillance testing, then I think that that's going to get us to a safer situation at the start of the school year.
Is there statistically false positives, false negatives that are going to manifest either in the asymptomatic or the pre-symptomatic? I mean, is that a given?
It's more likely that you're going to have a false negative than a false positive, where a swab was not collected properly or the test itself didn't work. And if we were doing recurring testing, so let's say we were doing a class on Monday and then the next Monday, if it came back as a false negative the first week because there was a student who was sick, ideally, either they'll become symptomatic and we'll test them in the meantime, or by the next week when we test them again, it's unlikely that we would have a false negative followed by another false negative. False positive is going to be unlikely, because then we're detecting something that wasn't there, and just the nature of these PCR-based tests is that really has to do with the lab handling it if you're going to get false positives. That's not something that the people doing the test or the collection side of the test is going to contribute to.
You're the scientist, you're the dad. What does it look like? You used the hypothetical grade 6 class. Grade 6 is of an age where I could see a lot of interest in this. There also might be a good science lesson along with it. But as you start to get littler kids swabbing themselves and doing this, does that upset the sense of protected normalcy, we're trying to get our kids to be able to function in school?
I think that we don't need to give our students or give our children a sense of normalcy, because we aren't living in a normal time right now. If we were thinking 100 years ago in London when, it's the Blitz and everyone has to turn their lights up, you don't lie to the kids and say, we're just going to bed early and we're turning all the lights off for fun. You can at least, simplify it down to a level that kids will understand and say, we know that people might be getting sick. We know that this is a way to test it, and this is just our way of essentially, it's like checking your temperature. It's like checking to see if you have any symptoms, except it's done in this sort of test tube with these swabs. So I think that even little kids can understand, I think, at least mine, probably once they're in grade 1, grade 2, of just, this is an experiment that we're doing, or this is a test that we're doing.
Kyle, good meeting you today. Thanks for taking the time with us.
Thank you.
Kyle Anderson, Assistant Professor of Biochemistry, Microbiology, Immunology at the U of S, asking for consideration of what's called pooled surveillance testing. Dr. Shahab says at this point that is not something they're going to be examining for a number of technical reasons. But what do you think? Make sense? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And we're going to go a little further down on the precautions that you think have to be done in your kids' school.